Hi, this is Mrs. Bustamante, and today I want to talk about something called descriptive statistics, which is really just a way that we can talk about data. Really, how can we talk about its differences and maybe its similarities? So we're going to do that by looking at two different data sets, and they're just made up data. They could be of anything right now, but we're going to have data set A, and you'll notice it has 6 values, and those values were 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. And then data set B, it also has 6 values, but the measurement for set B was all 3s all 6 times. So we're going to start by describing this data in different ways. And probably the way that you're most comfortable and confident and familiar with is something called the mean. And the mean is one way to describe the center of this data. We're actually going to talk about 3 different ways that we can describe the center of this data. But the first one we're going to use is the mean, also known as the average. And we're going to represent this average with something we call X bar. It means the same thing as the average. This is just kind of the symbol we're going to use to represent it. So what do we know? Well, we're also going to have this kind of funny looking formula that we use when we talk about the mean. It's going to be X bar equals 1 over n. This is a sigma with n at the top, I equal to 1 of x sub I. So what do all these things mean? Because they look different than how you're used to calculating the average, right? Well, x sub I is just referring to every number in the data set. Sigma means sum, so we're going to add all those data sets together. And then n refers to the number of data points. If you take calculus, you're going to get really familiar with some of these notations later on, or if you've already taken it, you might recognize some of this notation that we just talked about. So what does that really mean? What does that simplify to? Well, it means that I'm taking the sum of all the values starting with my first one. So I'm taking the sum of all my values, that's where my sigma comes in, and I'm going to divide it by the number of data points. So that's my 1 over n point, which is my number of data points, right? So if I simplify that, it's just sigma over n. In other words, it's just the sum of all my values divided by however many values that I have. And that's much more familiar to me, right? That's much more similar to how I know how to talk about the average or the mean of something. So let's go ahead and quickly do that for data set A and data set B. Well, data set A, so that's going to be 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 divided by 6. That'll give me an average or mean or an X bar of 3. And set B is going to be 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 divided by 6 because there's 6 values still in that data set. And that's going to give me an average or a mean value of 3. So I'm going to go ahead and record those two things up here in my little table. I'm going to say the mean of set A was 3 and the mean of set B was also 3. So what's another way we can describe this data, particularly the center of this data? Another way we can describe the center of this data would be to talk about the median. And the median of a data set is the halfway point between the data. In order to find that median, you're going to want to make sure that you arrange the data from the least to the greatest or the smallest number to the greatest. It can't just be in any random order. And then what if you have an even number of data points, as we do in our data set here, right? We have 6. Well, if you have an even number of data points, you're going to take the mean or the average of the 2 middlemost numbers. So in set A, that's going to be 3 plus 3 divided by 2. And in set B, that's going to be 3 plus 3 divided by 2. So you'll notice in my quick calculation here, right, when I look at the median for both data sets, they both came out 3. I'm going to go ahead and add that to my table up top here. My median for set A was 3, and my median for set B was also 3. There's one more way I can describe the center of this data. I can look at the mode of this data. And the mode of this data is just the most common number in the data set. So let's go look at my data really quickly here, right? The most common number, the number I see most often in set A is 3. And the number I see most often in set B is also 3. So when I go to look at the mode, or the most common number in both sets, it's also 3. And I'm going to record that in my table up here. So if we look at this way of describing data, or really the center of this data we've used so far, they kind of look exactly the same. But you and I both know that when we look at the data on the page, that they're not the exact same data set. So we're going to leave off in this video here by saying that we know there are differences in these two data sets, but looking at the center of them based on these ways doesn't really help us. So in our next video, we're going to talk about, is there another way that we can talk about and describe this data to show the differences in the two data sets?